Hi, folks. Let's talk a little bit about approaching plays as literature and some additional literary theory that will be useful to some of our upcoming work. So let's start with plays. You may have approached plays in a variety of ways before, whether it's reading Shakespeare in high school English class or watching Hamilton on Disney Plus or catching Death of a Salesman as you're at your local community theater. So I think that the variety of those examples really illustrates how plays are disseminated across a wide variety of media. So even though we will be accessing plays primarily via their text form, it's good to keep in mind that plays are designed for performance, and as we read, it can be productive for us to think about the potential for performance as we kind of engage with the text. Of course, as with most things, there are exceptions. The closet drama is a type of play that is designed just to be read and not performed, but most plays are designed with performance in mind. So one of the things to consider is that plays are full of elements that are designed to help people create a performance. And when we're reading, one of the things that we can do is sort of imagine how these elements might translate to a stage production. For example, as we're reading stage directions, we might imagine characters moving across a set and how that would look and how the characters would sort of be in relation to each other. We might also think about the description of setting and how that might be realized on the stage. So these are things, setting descriptions, stage directions, dialogue. These are elements of the text that I think are helpful to think about, not just in terms of understanding the story, but also in terms of their practical value in producing the play on stage. Another thing that you may discover is that although these kinds of elements, stage directions, etc., can be very prescriptive, there is room for interpretation. So it's interesting to consider what is being established through the text of the play and where is there room for interpretation. For example, you may have seen plays produced where they totally change the time period. This happens a lot with Shakespeare. People like to produce Shakespearean dramas in contemporary settings, which can be very interesting. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of food for thought for thinking about how to approach plays and some things that you might consider. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about a new theoretical approach. So this is the two-headed monster of new historicism and cultural studies, which are sort of melded together in one theoretical lens. So I've included the tagline here, subjectivity is here, so we might as well embrace it, because that's really at the heart of this approach. New historicism and cultural studies really kind of encourage the idea of acknowledging subjectivity interpretation and interrogating it so that we can understand it better and ultimately arrive at a more comprehensive and productive interpretation of a given text. So here are some key ideas that are related to this approach. You're going to be doing a deeper dive into new historicism and cultural studies in some of your reading, but this might be a good starting point. So this theory kind of asserts that literature is a product of time, place, and culture, and you can't really separate the piece of literature from these contexts without kind of changing the literature itself. So they're kind of saying, hey, this piece of literature wasn't created in a vacuum, and if you take it away from those contexts, you're kind of missing a big chunk of its meaning. So this theory also purports that any given reader can't really have a fully comprehensive knowledge of these temporal, geographical, and cultural contexts, that there are always going to be gaps in the knowledge of someone who's reading a piece of literature, if they're considering contexts. And then the final idea that we're going to talk about here is that this theoretical lens asserts that it's impossible for someone to be completely objective if they're interpreting a text. They argue that there's always going to be factors, whether it's unintentional bias or limited knowledge of the context, that is going to result in a somewhat subjective interpretation. And their idea is sort of that instead of pretending that that subjectivity isn't there or vilifying it, that we interrogate it and figure out why it's significant and where it's coming from so that we can use it more productively in our interpretations. So let's build on this and look at some interpretive questions. And again, you'll have an opportunity to see a more comprehensive list of interpretive questions related to this theory, but this might be a good start. So one of the things that people might ask using this theoretical approach would be how the text reflects elements of the time and culture in which it was produced. So this might require you to do a little bit of research to fill in your, fill in any gaps in your own knowledge, but looking for those connections between the text and its context is an acknowledgement that the text wasn't created in a vacuum. You might also think about the text in a larger context by considering it not only in relation to the specific time, place, and culture in which it was produced, but maybe also looking at a longer timeline, such as, an entire decade or something like that, comparing it to other pieces of literature produced within that decade, or even comparing it to other pieces of literature produced in that exact year. In that way, you're sort of getting an even broader idea of how the text fits into a bigger framework. Another thing to consider might be how ideas, terminology, or other aspects of the text might present in ways that are now obsolete. In a lot of cases, this happens with terminology. People speak differently in historical texts than they do in contemporary culture. There's some terminology that may be used in historical texts that is now considered inappropriate or politically incorrect. So those can be sometimes interesting avenues of analysis as well. So hopefully this has provided you with a good foundation for our next theoretical approach, and also thinking about how to approach plays as literature, as both of these things are going to be kind of figuring into our future work.